Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I want to ask the question, who's been the best driver so far through the first quarter of the 2025 F1 season? So today I'm going to be using my some of my new models I've made, been making over the last couple months, and these are my quality rating and race rating models. And basically, what they do is they compare the key performance metrics. So, for example, pole gap for drivers for qualifying, or for example, points or finishing position, and they basically compare that with historical data, using the data that we have so far this year to basically make the best possible approximation of how good each of the 10 cars on the F1 grid are. And using that, basically create like a rating system where it has almost basically no teammate comparisons. Basically, it doesn't use any teammate comparisons, and it basically just only compares against historical data. So I thought this was a fun thing to do for the quarter mark of the season, and we're going to basically go through 1 or 20 all the way up to 1. So basically, the worst drivers first, best drivers last, and it's basically an average between the ranking for the quali and for the race, because of course they're two different things, so two slightly different models. And if there's any scores that are, I think, a little bit off, I'll kind of give a little bit of comment and context as to why those are the case. In terms of how the scoring system works for quali, a big negative number is really good. Positive number is bad for quali, and for the race it's the opposite. So a big positive number, so about like a 2, is really good for the race. A negative number, big negative number like a -1, -2, that's really bad. For quality, the best numbers, the best scores are usually about a -0.6, whereas the worst ones are usually about a -1, -1.5 or so, just trying to give context for the range of numbers. So with that, all that aside, let's get started from number 20 all the way to number 1, and looking at, based on these two models, who's been the best drivers and the worst drivers to start the 2025 F1 season. So number 20, I don't think it's going to be much of a surprise, and that is Liam Lawson. So for Lawson, quality rating, a positive 0.486, which ranks 19th of the 20 drivers. Yes, he somehow is ranked ahead of someone else. Race rating, a negative 1.638, which does rank dead last amongst this year's grid. For Lawson, Red Bull stint obviously was an absolute disaster, but that's only 1/3 of the 6 races that he's done so far, and even his 4 races at Racing Bulls haven't been, particularly outstanding. He hasn't scored any points yet. He's, I think, outqualified Hadro once. And so, again, I think he's been, actually worse than in his 2 stand-in appearances in 2023 and in 2024. So I do think pressure is going to start to build on him, if he doesn't turn things around quickly. I'm not sure if a mid-season driver change is in the cards, but, if this continues, I could definitely see him being out at the end of the year. Number 19 is Jack Doohan, one of the other rookies who I think is under quite a bit of pressure. And if reports are to be believed, he could be out of a seat as soon as the next Grand Prix in Imola. So quality rating, a positive 0.361, which ranks 18th. Race rating, a negative 0.654, which ranks 17th. So in the bottom, basically 4 positions for both qualifying and the race. Did out-qualify Pierre Gasly for the first time in qualifying this past weekend. So again, that's a positive, and it does show some improvement. But he has had a lot of accidents, a lot of crashes, and with those kinds of incidents, it definitely hurts your ability to score points, do well in the races, which is why his race rating is also pretty bad. For Doohan, I'm probably going to have to make a video about him in the next week or so. The BBC is already reporting on it. The race is already reporting on it. And basically when those level of, especially the BBC, when the BBC is reporting on it, you kind of know it's basically already decided. So when we get an official announcement from Alpine, when, the F1 website is talking about it, I'll make a video talking about Doohan's very, very short F1 career in all likelihood. So moving on to number 18, and that is the other Red Bull driver, current Red Bull driver of Yuki Tsunoda. So for Tsunoda, quality rating a negative 0.024, so right around 0, which I would say is average, or kind of what you would expect, and that ranks 14th of the 20 drivers on this year's grid. Race rating and negative 1.507 is pretty bad, and that's ranks 19th of the 20 drivers. Now for Tsunoda, I do think there was a bit of context, a bit similar to the expected points I did before Miami. I think he was very, very unlucky with his 2 races that he did at Racing Bulls. Very horrible strategy in Australia, front wing exploding, plus also terrible strategy in China. And that meant that 2 races where he probably should have scored at least some points, didn't score any points. And then, of course, his 4 race stint at Red Bull has been, I think, not great, to say the least. And I think, obviously, there's the understanding that with him kind of not having any winter testing, kind of coming in pretty cold, it would take him a little bit of time to get up to speed. So I do think there's a little bit of a grace period there. But again, the 2 races at Racing Bulls, plus just the fact that compared to his teammate and compared to, I think, what that car is capable of, I do think a little bit underperforming there. So that kind of explains why the race rating is so low. Now, number 17 is Gabriel Bortoleto. So Bortoleto, quality rating is negative 0.012, which ranks 15th. Race rating and a negative 0.976, which ranks 18th. So for Bortoleto, I think he's been okay. Hasn't been, absolutely amazing, I would say. Hasn't been, one of the stars of the midfield, but I do think he's doing a pretty solid job. And I think just because he's in a Sauber, which is probably the worst car on the grid, although Aston's giving them a run for their money, I think, he's kind of doing what the car is expected, and he's what's expected of the car. And I think compared to his teammate Hulkenberg, I do think he's, a little bit slower than him, but, that being said, not too shabby for Bortoleto. And I think just because of how this model works, when you're basically performing a little bit worse, or kind of to be expected for a backmarker, it generally means that, quality of drivers historically in backmarkers, slower cars, is not as high. So basically, if you're doing what's expected there, it still will put you towards the bottom of these kinds of metrics. So number 16 is Esteban Ocon, which is a little bit of a surprise, especially when you look at the qualifying, but I can explain. So quality rating 0.72, which ranks 20th dead last, and the race rating 0.314, which ranks 12th. The race rating, I think, is pretty accurate, pretty close to how I would assess Ocon's performance this year. Quality rating is obviously much worse than I think most people would rank if you were just to rank drivers from 1 to 20 in qualifying. Reason for this is that the quality model really marks down on inconsistency. And if you look at the teammate head-to-head between the 2 Haas drivers, basically the smallest qualifying gap between the 2 of them has been 0.4 of a second. They've basically been going back and forth, one driver out-qualifying the other by about 0.4 of a second over the last 4 races. And race is only 6 races long so far. So that's basically 2/3 of the races. It's been, very, very big qualifying gaps. And, we'll see Ocon's teammate in a little bit as well. But the other thing as well that makes Ocon's score look a lot worse is that he did the first race in Australia, or qualified for the first race in Australia. Behrman did not. And because Haas were so far off the pace at that race, it does make Ocon's score look like quite a bit worse than his teammates, which I think is a little bit unfair. But I think, again, with a couple more races when we get to the mid-season mark, that should have sorted itself out, and it should be a little bit more representative. Now, number 15 is Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, quality rating 0.219, which ranks 16th, which I think is about accurate, maybe a little bit too high. Race rating of 1.62, which ranks 13th. Again, also a little bit high, but with some of the drivers who benefited massively from the crashes, the mayhem in Australia and in China. Well, China is more disqualifications than mayhem. But that being said, for drivers who benefited from those 2 races, their race ratings in particular are going to be a little bit higher than you would expect. And Stroll definitely benefits quite a bit from that. The other thing as well, just wanted to mention, is that both of these do not use sprint qualifying or the sprint result. So for some drivers, we'll get to one in a couple of slides here, but for one driver who's done much better, I would say, in sprints than they have in the Grand Prix, that does kind of, show up in his data. But for Stroll, I think he's basically done what you would expect, be a little bit below average, but I don't think he's been awful. Number 14 is Ollie Behrman. So when you look at the quali rating compared to his teammates, again, it is pretty low, but again, it is slightly better than Ocon, despite the fact that I think Ocon does have the upper hand in the quali head-to-head. So quali rating 0.279, which ranks 17, so not great there. Race rating of 493, though, is pretty good, and he has shown that despite the fact that he's started at the back from quite a few Grand Prix this season, he's able to move his way through the field pretty well. So the quality rating is actually quite good, and it ranks him 10th amongst the 20 drivers on the grid. Now, number 13 is Kimi Antonelli. So this Antonelli is a bit of a tough one because obviously he's a rookie just like all the other 5 rookies on the grid, but he is in definitely the best machinery. And so that makes it a little bit tougher to assess because, of course, when you're comparing with historical data, the quality of those drivers who are going to be in cars that are comparable to his are going to be a lot more experienced, are going to be, very, very talented as well. The model does, account for this somewhat. But again, it does make things a little bit tricky. So for quality rating, a negative 0.146, which does rank 10th, and I would say that's pretty accurate. I would say he's been, about the middle of the range for qualifying. Race rating, a negative 0.17, which does rank 15th, a little bit on the low side, but to be expected for a rookie. I do think he's had a couple races, maybe not entirely his own fault, where, quality performance has been pretty good, and he's, underperformed that slightly in a couple races like Bahrain, and I think Miami would be another example of that. But I think for Miami, there were some circumstances there, such as the timing of the VSC, which definitely, negatively affected him. Number 12 is Lewis Hamilton. A little bit surprised to see him this early, but I'll explain. So quality rating, a negative 0.026, which ranks 13th. Qualifying's definitely been a bit of a struggle for Hamilton. I think he's only out-qualified Leclerc once, and some of the gaps, I think there's been a couple of races where it's like 4 to 5 tenths of a second, which is, I think, frankly, too big in front-running machinery. Race rating 0.385, and given that even the last couple of years while qualifying has been a struggle for Hamilton, races have generally still been pretty good. But for Hamilton, oddly enough, I think he's done very, very well in the sprints this year. Of course, won the sprint in China, came third in the sprint in Miami. Those 2 results, first, third, are better than any result he's had in any Grand Prix by at least 2 positions. I think his best Grand Prix finish is a 5th this year. And because sprints are not included in this, again, it will kind of somewhat alter the perception of how well he's doing in Grand Prix. But for the race rating, 0.3385, 11th, like I said, again, average, slightly below average. So again, that's something that he's going to want to improve for the rest of the season. Now, number 11 is Carlos Sainz, one of the drivers who I'd say is probably the biggest discrepancy between quality rating and race rating just in terms of ranking. So quality rating a negative 0.301, which ranks 7th, so says he's been one of the best qualifiers this season. In race rating a negative 0.566, which does rank 16th. For Sainz, unfortunately, he has definitely not, I think, I did my expected, when I looked at my the results so far for the expected points model before Miami, Sainz was one of the lowest ranked drivers, and that's just simply because even though he's qualifying pretty well, he's simply not delivering points from the points that you would expect from those high starting positions. And some of that's not entirely his fault, but some of it is. For example, crashing out in Australia, for instance, and even last time out in Miami, started 6th, only finished 9th, whereas his teammate basically moved up from his starting position. Obviously, there was a little bit of circumstances in there and a little bit of bad luck, but those are just kind of 2 examples of where I think Sainz, is still struggling a little bit in the race. His race pace, I don't think is quite as good as it was last year in Ferrari, but hopefully this is something that, he can improve over the coming races. Number 10, similar to Sainz, but I think for slightly different reasons. So for Alonso, quality rating is actually pretty high, negative 0.2, which ranks 8th, so one of the better ratings on the grid. And for race rating, a negative 0.1245, which ranks 14th. Now for Alonso, I think he's been very, very unlucky. Of course, I know he crashed out in Australia, but obviously mostly his fault, but again, gravel on the track in that corner, again, a little bit unfortunate there. Of course, mechanical DNF in China, where he almost certainly would have scored points. I mean, Stroll scored points in China. And of course, in the sprint. Like I said, sprint doesn't count, but unfortunately, he's had a lot of bad luck. His teammates scored all of his points, all of the team's points so far this year. And so for Alonso, again, he's, I think, been pretty unlucky. But, as the weeks have gone along, I've noticed that the race rating for Alonso has gotten better, progressively better every race. And for Stroll, it's gotten progressively worse. So I think, that luck is kind of evening out, and a larger sample size will definitely, I think, help Alonso and his ranking at least, and his rating as well, should both continue to improve. Number 9, I think probably one of the most surprising rookies, I think, in the positive, and that is Isaac Hadjar. So for Hadjar, quality rating, a negative 0.7, negative 0.07, I should say, which is 12th overall, and then a race rating of 0.935, which ranks 9th. For Hadjar, I think, pretty surprising. I think his qualifying performances have been pretty good. Again, split qualifying with Tsunoda, but and then has out-qualified Lawson 3 of the 4 races together. Races, he's had a couple decent point scoring races. I think he scored points in Jeddah and also scored points in Japan. So again, 2 point scoring finishes there, which is more than either of his teammates had during their time together at Racing Bulls. Now, one thing I think I want to mention for both Hadjar and for Alonso is that I think, especially for Hadjar, is that because his teammate's technically still a rookie, it means that there isn't really a super strong benchmark to kind of stack up against. And while the rating is for both the models for quality rating and race rating, as much as possible, do try to account for that. How strong, the drivers are driving the car. Again, it can only do so much for that. So I do think, for Hadjar, that is going to be one question mark, like how much of this is just Lawson being awful and how much of it is him generally being, quite good. So that's something that I think we'll only be able to tell with time. But for now, I think, Hadjar is doing a pretty decent job. So moving up to number 8, and that is Nico Hülkenberg. So for Hülkenberg, quality rating, negative 0.135, which ranks 11, so about average, middle of the road, and a race rating of 1.011, which ranks 7th. Similar to Stroll, Hülkenberg benefited massively from some of the chaos in the first couple of races, and that means that his rating is, quite a bit higher than I think it otherwise would be. His rating's been going down, but that being said, I think Hülkenberg's been, pretty decent, done, more than what's expected so far for Sauber. Number 7 is Pierre Gasly. Quality rating negative 0.181, which ranks 9th, and then a race rating of 1.112, which ranks 6th. A little bit surprising, given that he's only scored 6 points. I think Alpine have had a pretty poor start to the season, but for Gasly, I think he's been pretty decent, and I think given that the struggles Alpine have had so far this season, just scoring good points on the board, I think has been, a pretty good display of talent and performance by Gasly. Again, generally doing a really good job in qualifying against Doohan. But again, with some of these other matchups, like Alonso with Stroll, Hadjar with Lawson, when you don't have an established teammate, it is a little bit harder to definitively say how much of this is this driver doing really well, and how much of this is just them looking better because they have a really weak teammate. So, number 6 is Alex Albon. I would say probably the best driver in the midfield so far this season, and I think, the model backs that up as well. So, quality rating, a negative 0.365, which ranks 6th, and a race rating of 1.009, which ranks 8th. I think for Albon, very, very good, very opportunistic as well with points, big points finishes in both Australia and Miami. I don't think, Williams and Albon can realistically expect to score, top 5 finishes, once every 3 Grand Prix. I think it's going to be a lot of 8th, 9th, 10th finishes. So again, might be a little bit unrepresentative, this early sample size. But that being said, I do think Albon's been, very, very good. And I think he matches up pretty well against Sainz, despite the fact that even though he out-qualified Sainz first 3 races together, last 3 races Sainz has out-qualified him. So the momentum is a little bit more in Sainz's favor in recent races. So that is something that he'll have to be a little bit careful about. Number 5 is Lando Norris. If you went onto Reddit, if you went onto X, or formerly Twitter, they would tell you that Lando Norris is probably the worst driver ever. I don't think Norris is the worst driver ever. I don't think he's even the worst driver this season. In fact, my rating says that he's the 5th best driver in qualifying and he's the 4th best driver in the race. I think he gets a lot of criticism for, some of the comments that he made when he was younger, when he wasn't in the best car on the grid. And saying things like, of course, Hamilton and Verstappen should win every race. They're in the best car of the grid. And when he's in the best car on the grid and he doesn't win every race, of course, people are going to make fun of him for that. But for Norris, I do think he's been okay. I think he can definitely be better. I think large stretches of last year, he was performing better than he has so far this year. So again, that does clearly show that I think there is a little bit more performance there. And it's really up to Norris to find that and unlock it and, translate that, talent into points. So quality rating, like I said, negative 0.475 ranks 5th. So I think, pretty good there. Top 5 in the grid. And again, top 5 in the races as well with a race rating of 1.287, which is 4th. Now moving into the top 4, number 4 is his teammate, Oscar Piastri. So very, very interesting that this season, the two drivers, 1 and 2 in the championship, are not 1 and 2 in either race rating. Well, actually, Piastri is number 2 in the quality model, but just as an overall average, that neither the two drivers, 1st and 2nd in the championship, are, in the top 2 of my the top 2 of my kind of overall ranking, which is quite interesting. So quality rating negative 0.562 for Piastri. I think he's been excellent in qualifying in general, a bit better than his teammate, but not the best driver on the grid this year. Race rating 1.143, which ranks 5th, so I think still pretty good. That spin in Australia was holding him back quite a bit, and if I had done this video before Miami, I think that race rating would have been 9th overall instead of 5th. So that big win in Miami from 4th on the grid moves him up quite a bit, which again shows that this is still a pretty small sample size and individual races can have a pretty big impact. But for Piastri, I think he's been good. Big step up from last year for sure. And it's going to be really interesting to see if he can maintain this performance and momentum as we get into the European leg of the season. Now, moving into the top 3, number 3 is Charles Leclerc. Very consistent. He's ranked 3rd in both quality rating and for the race rating. So quality rating, a negative 0.529. I think he's getting really the most out of that Ferrari. The only qualifying session where I think he left a little bit of performance on the table was in China. But, besides that, I think he's been, very good in qualifying. Race rating 1.563, which is also 3rd. I think that 3rd, despite the fact that Ferrari's strategy department exists, I think Leclerc's been very, very good, and really rightfully deserves that 3rd place overall. If he was driving this year's McLaren, good chance he probably would have won all 5 races or all 6 races so far this season, which I think is kind of a testament both to how good Leclerc has been, but also I think the fact that I think both McLaren drivers have left some points on the board. Now, number 2 is none other than George Russell. I know overall when you do the average between himself and Leclerc, it's basically the same, but Russell does have the higher, better individual score of the two, so I put him ahead of Leclerc. So for Russell, quality rating of negative 0.491, which is 4th, race rating 1.727, which ranks 2nd. I do think Russell's been a little bit lucky this year. Races like Miami, Australia as well, a little bit of luck involved there. But I do think overall he's been very, very good. Qualifying, I think, very good as well. But I do think, there have been a couple drivers who have been better. And there have been some races where, like, for example, either Miami where he was out-qualified by Antonelli, or other races like I would say Saudi Arabia or even Bahrain maybe. I think actually no, Japan, not Bahrain, where I think there was a little bit more performance there in the Mercedes. I think, Russell even admitted in his post-qualifying interviews that, again, I think there was a little bit left on the table. So, but nonetheless, I think Russell's having a really good start to the season. He's, absorbed the mantle of being team leader, the responsibility of team leader really, really well. I think he's had, an excellent start to the season. If Mercedes can somehow get their act together, take the fight to McLaren consistently, Russell could be a dark horse for the title, but I think similar to Verstappen, I think that technical directive coming in Spain is going to have to, really neuter McLaren's race pace advantage for that to happen. So number one, not a massive surprise, I would guess, and that is of course Max Verstappen. When you make these models and drivers like the best drivers, last 5 years or so, I would say Verstappen when he's ranked on top, mid 2010s, late 2010s when Hamilton's that the number one driver on these ranking ratings, early 2000s it's Schumacher. That generally suggests that it's pretty representative, even if there are years where the champion is not always the top ranked driver, which I think is very much the case in real life, which I think kind of shows that these models are I do like these models quite a bit. Now quality rating a negative 0.687, very good, almost 0.1 better than any other driver that ranks first. He's gotten 3 pole positions this year, despite the fact I don't think he's had the best car any of those 3 occasions. I think it's been a car that's been very close to the McLarens at times, but when you look at sector data and optimal lap time, it does show that the McLarens have generally been leaving pace on the board, time on the table, but definitely that can't really be said for Verstappen for most of this season. Race rating, excellent as well, 2.675, which ranks first. So I do think Verstappen, despite the fact third in the championship, a bit of a clumsy, not necessarily a clumsy weekend, but definitely a weekend where there's quite a few points left on the board in Miami. The models say that Verstappen has been the best driver so far this season. So let me know your thoughts. Are there any of these scores, any of these rankings that you perhaps disagree with? Obviously, some of the ones like, Ocon being ranked 20th, I explained the context of why that was the case. But again, who have been your best drivers so far this season? Let me know in the comment section down below. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.